Tonight, we're going to be talking about some of the things I've been musing on as it pertains to emotional health and its opposite, emotional unhealth. And frankly, when and where does it kind of toe the line into abuse? And I picked up a book last week, actually, on Saturday. I think it was Saturday, where um, I started really kind of leaning into this book that I read 4 years ago. It was given to me, and it's actually written specifically for women in a Christian lens. So this book was given me by a therapist of mine 4 years ago, and it's called "Is It Me?" And it's very much so focusing on women specifically in the Christian church who are in an abusive marriage, emotionally abusive marriage. And so I have been revisiting this over the last couple of days, and I talked about this on Saturday last week, specifically in the perspective of women, and I got um, just a message or two specifically asking that we talk about it from the man's perspective. And um, I also have been chatting with some men over the last month, specifically men who are in the process of or considering divorce for this very reason, where they're just in really emotionally unhealthy and borderline emotionally abusive marriages. And so I wanted to pull back the curtain on this subject a little bit. Last week, I set the context for the conversation, which is there's something about this topic that really, even now as I say it, I like it chills. There's just something about this topic of emotional abuse that it's such a topic that's so specific to each person. There's so much into what contributes someone showing up the way that they do. And there's so much need for compassion. There's so much need for action and curiosity. Like, this topic is one that has been so under discussed, and then all of a sudden these words are being thrown out like narcissist throughout a lot of social media, and a lot of kind of like this next generation coming in. There's a lot of talk around self-love, a lot of talk around narcissism, and it's just a little bit overwhelming for those of us, in my generation and older, where we never were given true categories of what does emotional intelligence mean, what is emotional health, what even is a narcissist. We're throwing around these terms that are really damaging if we're not all in agreement about what it actually is. And there's not a hard fast line on what delineates between emotional health and unhealth, emotional abuse and emotional unhealth. So it's like layers of what are we even pursuing when it comes to emotional intelligence and emotionally healthy relationships. Y'all, ever since kindergarten, we've been cultivating our IQ, our intellectual intelligence, and we've never really been given training wheels, much less so taking them off so that we can go ride our bike of emotional intelligence. And so this is where, knowing is something that has come about by way of me identifying when my marriage fell apart. It was so deeply rooted in emotional unhealth, like both my husband and I. And neither one of us ever received any kind of guidance on what does it look like to have an emotionally healthy marriage. And so we were not clear on what our target was. And before we dive into what is emotional health, what are signs of unhealth versus signs of abuse, it's so important to identify that if we do not set a clear target for what is our ideal in terms of what is our marriage ideal, what is my personal ideal, what are my values, what am I actually striving for, who do I hope to be? Actually, just this afternoon, I was shooting a message back to a friend of mine. They sent me a note. They were like, didn't you write your eulogy a couple years ago, or like your obituary or something like that? And they're like, how did that impact you? And I shared that at 30, I wrote my eulogy. And then I took my eulogy, what I wish and hope everyone would say about me at the end of my life. I turned it first person, present tense, and I proceeded to read that almost every single day for my entire 30th year. And what it forced me to do was look in the mirror. Who do I want to be at the end of my life? And am I living a way now that's actually putting me on the right trajectory to live that kind of a life? And there were moments where I actually found that there was disparity between the beliefs that I espoused. I want to be this person versus how I was actually living. And I needed to change my behavior, or I needed to change the belief. The belief specifically that in this context, I actually was writing a lot about kind of being very cultured and being very invested in travel and almost like worldly pursuits, like knowing music and culture and art and people, like really truly understanding different cultural heritage. And I was kind of sitting and looking at my life after I wrote that, and I was like, can I actually say that? Like, I'm not living my life in such a way that's allowing me to be able to have that be true. So what am I waiting for? Am I expecting that to happen in later parts of my life? And if so, that's fine. But what I had never done was actually sit with intention around these very kind of existential concepts of like, oh, at some point, or more like ethereal concepts of, oh, yes, I want to be well traveled. Well, when? At what point in my life am I actually going to become well traveled? I wasn't living my life in such a way where I had these milestones with seasons tied around them. They were just kind of these really nice, pithy thoughts. And so, what writing my eulogy did was it grounded me in looking at my current life, looking at what I espoused versus how I was living, and saying, okay, I either need to stop saying that or change my behavior. And so I actually really have taken kind of drastic actions to be better traveled and be more well-rounded. I even going so far as let me spend a week with an Italian family on their vineyard. And y'all, that was probably one of the best experiences of my life. I was 32 or 31, and I went and stayed with an Italian family for a week on the island of Ischia, right off of Naples. And it was such an incredible experience to eat their food, eat with them. Uh, there's something really intimate about mealtime and being able to have that kind of cultural experience, hearing them talk in Italian, hearing them talk in English, trying to like pick up words, trying to communicate with them. It was such an incredible experience, but that would have never happened had I not 2 years prior, or I guess a year and a half prior, analyzed, am I actually living a congruent life between beliefs and behaviors? And so the reason why I bring this up is because for so many of us, we enter into massive commitments. We enter into seasons of our lives. We start projects and we're not even clear about what is the actual target. What am I actually wanting to achieve? Who do I want to be in this situation, dynamic, role? What is my ideal? And where my former husband and I really fell short was we never set the target. And so what we ended up doing was simply doing a 360 and repeating what was modeled for us. And that was his parents and their dynamic, and me modeling my parents and our dynamic. And it was so unhealthy because the way his parents interacted with and the way my parents interacted, it was like ships in the night and very unhealthy in terms of blending those two together. And what I've seen so many times since then, now that I'm kind of living aware and more awake to what does emotional health look like, feel like, sound like, I'm seeing this over and over and over again. That rather than when we don't have a target, we can never do a 180. We're always going to do a 360 because we practice what we know. We practice the principles that were handed to us. So until we actually go create and identify new principles by which we will then live, we will always end up repeating history. We see it in actual history, the repetition of the old, and then we see it in our own lives. Until we set new targets, we will always end up repeating that which was modeled to us, that which was handed to us. And it is only with great intention can we then create a new target. And so that new target is in every area of our lives. This concept of writing a eulogy, I followed up with my friend after sending, kind of this high level, okay, I created a eulogy for my life. But then just a few weeks ago, I started creating very relationship driven eulogies, because what my best friend will say about me at my funeral is going to be different than what my dad would say, because they know me in different contexts. obviously the ideal is that there's a through line with every single relationship, yet that's actually as it should be. That's actually honoring the unique relationships because every person is different, and thus we're going to interact slightly different to varying degrees with each person. And so with that, I started creating and considering what would I want my dad to say about me? What would I want my younger sister to say about me? And as I started considering this, one, I found growth opportunities that I wanted to focus on. But then second, I realized that there was an opportunity coming up that it was actually with my parents and my two younger sisters that I knew I would regret if I didn't do it. And it was this trip to Rome and this 11-day cruise around 4 countries. And that the next morning, after I did this exercise of like, how would I want my dad to write his eulogy about me? The next morning I woke up, I called my dad and I said, "Dad, I think I want to go with you guys." And he was like, "Okay." And so that morning I booked my flights and I flew out to Rome literally less than a week later. And y'all, the clarity that we get on creating our targets, being so clear of who and how we want to exist and live, allows for us to craft our life, to design our life, to create something new so that we don't just end up repeating history, end up living in the footprints of what was modeled for us. Now, there are beautiful, beautiful models that are given to us, and what a blessing that is. Yet we're meant to stand on the shoulders and actually continue onward rather than repeat their footsteps. It's let's take that which was given to us, like our heritage, and take that with us as we continue to move forward and progress and go higher and deeper and farther than them. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how we maintain forwarding momentum and progress and impact. And if we don't do this, we're going to the thing that's so sad about a 360 is that we end up right back where they were. Whereas if we set a 180 target, we're moving forward. We're going ahead. So we need to know our starting point. And actually, I had the privilege of doing a coaching session with Dr. Jeff Spencer, and he was the performance coach for Lance Armstrong, among many other athletes. And so he called it the goal positioning statement, a GPS. Where are we starting? What's our starting line right now? And so, yes, we need to identify our target, but we also need to identify where are we starting from? What was handed to us? What was modeled for us? What is our MO? What's the natural bent and the natural leaning towards something? And y'all, this is what's really beautiful in relationships. It's both beautiful and tragic. So it's all about alchemy, right? I was actually given, I felt like this was a gift when I learned this. So I've been in certain relationships and romantic or otherwise, just friendships, relationships with family, any kind of relationship. I was told that when you feel safe enough with someone, effectively you start to let down your walls, and parts of you that aren't as perfected and curated start to reveal themselves. And I actually had this reflected back to me by my sister and my best friend a year ago. I was hosting a knowing retreat, and when I have attendees do these exercises, I'll do them too. And I love it because one, it allows for me to pace with them, but then two, it allows for me to help them go deeper as I go deeper myself. So there's a very reciprocal element of all of us doing the work in real time together. Some of the exercises I've done already, some of them come to me in the moment we do it together, and it's so cool and so powerful. And so one of the exercises that I had everyone do was text those, like, a couple people closest to you. And this was actually an all women's retreat in New York. And I had them text their closest people. What does it look like when I'm most healthy? What does it look like when I'm unhealthy? And what percentage of the time am I balancing between the two? And that is like a very risky text, because if you don't want to know the truth, don't send that. But if you do, and if you're open to it, it's so revealing. My sister and my best friend both said something so incredibly similar. They said, Christine, when you're healthy, you are free flowing. You're not monitoring your words. You're not checking your words. You don't have a filter effectively. It's like you're just feeling really, really safe. And so what that can do is that in the kind of free flow, in very intimate relationships, you can sometimes say things that are hurtful, or say things that are deeply profound, or get to places that you otherwise would have never gone. Because when you're in relationship with someone, there's a semblance of connection that, man, it's like nothing. It's like nothing else, to be able to go and kind of traverse the places in your mind and in your soul that you otherwise wouldn't have gone with someone that you're not as close with, or even by yourself. I think the ideal is that we can go to those places alone and go to those places with in relationship. But what can so often happen is that it can catch us by surprise and catch them by surprise. And what's so beautiful is that we feel safe enough to go to those places. And those places can be really painful memories. They can often be triggered by the other person doing something. And then we end up going to those places, and then we end up having a reaction that feels like a kid in us, because we haven't tapped on that. We haven't opened that door. We've never opened that door with anyone because we never felt safe enough to. So in actuality, we actually, in terms of us having a reaction to our partner or our parent or our friend or whoever, if we have a strong reaction and we see, man, like, who was that? I never get that angry. I'm sorry. Like, I have no idea what just happened. That's actually kind of a compliment to that person, that we feel safe enough with them to unveil that little kid in us. And there's something really to be honored and sacred in that moment. And there's something equally as important to identify, okay, what is the arena? I love the concept of the knowing arena. It's based off of Teddy Roosevelt's Citizen and the Republic. I believe it was 1912, 1914. He gave this speech in Paris. And in a section of that speech is a section called "The Man in the Arena," and it's likened to the person who is in the arena doing the work, face marred by kind of the triumphs of winning, and then also the noise and the kind of emotional veracity of failure. Like, they know everything in between. They're dirty, grimy, but they know life because they've engaged with it, versus the person on the outside of the arena who knows neither triumph nor defeat, and they're the critic, and yet they're the loudest one saying, how dare you, you're so foolish, really, really criticizing the man in the arena who's actually the one doing the work. And so this concept of the arena, I really, really love, because the ideal is that you and I, on a daily basis, are going into the arena, putting in the reps, doing the work, so that in game time, when we are caught by surprise by an emotion, caught by surprise of something, some trigger, some moment that makes us really angry, we've already put in the practice to know kind of what's the genesis, what's the original state or story of why I'm getting angry. And the ideal also is that we've gone into the arena with someone who is maybe further ahead and can kind of be a mentor with us and like be a coach in the arena. Or we've gone into the arena with our partner or our parent or someone close to us, either with that third person mentor role or just the two of us. And we go in with intention to start creating kind of the rules of engagement. Hey, when we go into the arena, hey, when we're angry at each other, these are the boundaries that we're going to abide by. No cursing at each other, no hitting each other, just let's create the basics. What are the basic rules of engagement when we have a problem? What are also the basic rules of engagement when we're actually practicing? And when I say practicing, it really is like, okay, let's sit down. and we're going to intentionally address a hard topic versus caught by surprise. And that's kind of what, when I think of game time, it's the caught by surprise. We practice for those moments. And y'all, that's where rules of engagement are really important to protect us from the emotional health that was modeled for us, patterned for us, handed to us. There are very few examples that were modeled for me and many of those close to me of like, this is the ideal, this is the target type of relationship, this is how you do conflict resolution. We weren't taught those things, and yet those are the very important things that are the backbone of society, of work, of our professional dynamics. We have to know how to iterate on different ideas when they're in conflict with each other. How do we not take things personally? How do we allow for creativity to flourish and thrive when it's not tied to ego? These are so important in a work context and a family context. And so it's so important identifying the rules of engagement, because otherwise what is potentially just emotional unhealth can end up erring more towards emotional abuse. And so I had initially planned to dive deep into this for the men's perspective, and let's just kind of see how far I go with this. Some of the behaviors, some of the types of engagements that I think we can kind of categorize, where it's like rules of engagement, but then also when we're engaging without those rules, without boundaries, without any kind of structure. And when I say that, y'all, it's really, really important. I remember the first early years of my marriage, the first year in particular, I was like, is every marriage like this? And, I was 20 years old, so young, child bride, don't recommend it. And man, I felt so much dissonance with like, no one ever told me how to engage in like, I don't know how to fight. Growing up, it was, man, if there was ever any conflict, my mom would actually say, this means you guys need to spend more time together. And we were all like, okay, mom. But like, there was no contending. There was no, oh, you have a different opinion than I do. What do we do? It was peace and love and joy and like all the good things. And there was just no space or honor or regard given for a disagreement or a healthy conflict. And so therefore I had no boundary line or no context, no structure of like, okay, this is how to enter the arena. And so I want to talk through this is from the book called Is It Me? And it's by Natalie Hoffman, written for women, specifically Christian women, but frankly, it's really, really universal, regardless of gender and regardless of religion. And this was given to me, and it really was helpful for me a couple years ago. But I want to read some of these things that it's devastating to read, because so many people find themselves in these relationships, regardless if they're men or women. Again, I talked to 2 men over the last couple of weeks that are in a marriage crisis because their wives it feels like emotional battering. These men just feel beat up and they don't know what to do. And y'all, oh my gosh, just 2 days ago, I was on the phone with a client of mine, funny enough, and he was talking to me about how he was like, men were raised being taught how to treat women. Today, women are not taught how to treat men. They're not taught how to be good wives. They're not taught how to be good mothers. The push for equality, the push for the feminist movement, there's so much focus on that it's like, okay, well, let's not forget the other side, throw out the baby with the bathwater. And when he said that men have been taught how to treat women for a while, and this isn't, go back and listen to my conversation last week if you're a feminist. We were talking to the women last week. This is really for the men. And even still, it's like, wow, when he said that was really convicting to me. I was like, you're right. We're not taught. Like, I'm so grateful my mom was a wife and mother, and I had to learn the professional side. I really had to cultivate, how do I do business? How do I work? I kind of had to figure all of that out for myself. She taught me how to nurture, how to be at home, how to love people. It was like very, very strongly feminine. And, this is where I actually think it's so important, because so often we actually say male or female, but the feminine is really kind of the right brain, and the masculine is really kind of the left brain, the organizational, structured, managerial type of existing. And then the feminine, the nurturing, caretaking, emotional side. And y'all, there's a reason why it's called left brain, right brain, 50-50. And some say that the right brain actually has more potency. It's not actually right brain and left brain, but that's just kind of the analogy for easy understanding. Y'all, we are both logical and emotion driven creatures. And so for so long as we're shutting down one part of us, we're not ever going to be able to be fully human and actually exist in the full human experience. Actually, it's so funny. I say my mom really taught me the nurturing the feminine side as I felt unsafe. So when we feel unsafe in relationship, parts of us are going to shut down and shut off. And so for the majority of my 20s, I actually had shut down that very feminine side of me and was really kind of in the masculine, like organizational and managerial, especially, that reflected in starting my business at 26. I was very logic driven. But I started also kind of resurfacing this whole emotional intelligence side. I never knew that word, emotional intelligence. I never knew at all. Oh, not even I didn't know. I actually had a very negative view of emotions. And so I read this book called Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown. And actually at the very beginning, she quotes the man in the arena. So that's still a fun full circle moment for me when I realized that a couple months ago. I was like, oh my gosh, this speech by Teddy Roosevelt that I've been obsessed with. It was in the very beginning of her book. And that book was the very thing that it kind of awoke me to the value of emotions 4 years ago. And what really captivated me in the book was actually when she was talking about the research she had done among men. There were so many men that had been living with suppressed emotions. One man came up to her with like tears in his eyes, and he is like, I am supposed to be the prince on the white horse, and my wife and daughters, anytime I express an emotion, they look at me as though I just fell off it. And man, it was wild. I felt that. I actually felt like I resonated so much with, I need to save the day. I need to be the caretaker. And I realized there's actually a very similar line between women feeling like they have to be the caretaker and men feeling like they need to be the provider. One is emotionally, I need to keep people emotionally happy. I need to ensure the emotional well-being for my family. Whereas the other is the financial well-being. Either way, it's still very much so stemming from the same place, which effectively is codependency. And the danger there is that we don't actually have there's so many dangers there. I think one of the most dangerous parts is that we don't have any semblance of care or regard for ourselves. We're so oriented towards everyone else that it allows for us to get so depleted, so empty, that finally we cannot take it anymore and we are done. And the danger there is that, one, we never give the other people in our lives the opportunity to change. We never voice our frustration or concern early enough so that they can actually change. So not only are we preventing their growth, but we're also getting to the point where they've got no idea that it's beyond repair. We're done. It's too far gone. And those are equally damaging for me and for them. And in this process, even looking back at relationships in my past life, I never took the time to consider, how do I actually feel? What do I actually need? And I was so disassociated from my emotions. I was so disassociated from my own physical body. We talk about the intellectual intelligence, the emotional intelligence. There's a physical intelligence as well. Our body remembers things. Our body stores things. There's an author called Bessel van der Kolk, and he wrote the book called The Body Keeps the Score. And this book unpacks actually kind of the finding, the the deeming of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's all about how veterans will literally not be able to have the proper attribution of the trauma that they're feeling in their body. So their body feels like a bomb is going off right now. The body doesn't know that that was a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. The body remembers dates, it remembers seasons, it remembers moments, it remembers loud sounds, it remembers what it saw. And so all of a sudden, things will come flooding back to the body, whether it's a scent, like you catch a whiff of perfume and you get taken back to a moment. And we all know that. It's happened for all of us many times in many different ways, probably not to the extent that this book talks about, but we all get taken back every year as the change of season happens, heading into autumn. I just get subconsciously deeply sad. And I'm like, why am I feeling so sad? And I'm like, oh, the anniversary of my brother-in-law is coming up, and my body knows. My body just is like gearing up for the anniversary. It remembers that time of year. And same with December and January. It's around the January time that my husband and I, where he finally decided that he wanted a divorce, and we signed paperwork. And so every January for the last 3 or 4 years, I'm like, man, I thought it'd be easier this year. And it's like, no, my body is still processing just the loss, and no matter how much we heal, our body still knows. But in the intentional healing, in the intentional going back, in the intentional revisiting for the purpose of healing, we get more free than ever before. And so I want to just talk through some of these behaviors and patterns, and if it resonates with you, I think that I want to talk through a few behaviors, and then I want to talk about one very clear behavior that can be a defining point between, is this emotional abuse or emotional unhealth? Because it's really important. All of us have emotional unhealth manifestations. I know I do. And if we were to deny it, I believe that there's a fundamental disassociation with truth, and we're not looking in the mirror. So as I read these, the goal is that we're able to identify where is there unhealth, not just in our partner, but in our life too. Because here's the reality, and then I'll keep going. Every relationship is a mirror for us in some way. I cannot tell you how many times I have been so annoyed at my partner, and when I sit and think, I'm like, okay, I know that this is somehow mirroring back to me something. I see myself in them, or I see how I did something similar last week. And then immediately it's that biblical concept of take the log out of your eye first, and then you can see the speck in your brother's eye. And I hate that phrase, and it's so true. So as I read this list, I think it would behoove us both to use it as a mirror. And also it's really important to know the truth in our relationships, because for those of us who struggle with codependence, it's so easy to ignore the truth and stay focused on others to our own detriment until it's too late, for their sake and for ours. So here are some behaviors of what would demarcate between emotionally unhealthy versus healthy relationships. Is your partner chronically dishonest? Do they leave out information with the intent to mislead or hide something? Do they say things happened that didn't? Do they likewise say things didn't happen that did? Do they chronically say they will do something but then don't follow through with those commitments? Do they inflate their own good deeds while minimizing your efforts? Do they point out to you what they've done and expect praise for normal adult responsibilities? Do they chronically turn a discussion into an argument and blame you for intentionally starting that argument? Do they ignore your efforts to connect, or use facial and body language that indicate their disinterest and annoyance towards you? Do they chronically blame you for things that they themselves need to take responsibility for? Are you the scapegoat? Do they chronically put their interest above yours? Do they criticize your interests, hobbies, friendships, fears, hopes, dreams? Are they chronically sullen when you're happy? And alternatively, are they happy-go-lucky when you're suffering in some way? Are they chronically unavailable when you need them most? Are they chronically uninvolved in the daily emotional burden of raising the family and running the household? Do they show up only when they feel like it and when it suits their timetable or agenda, or when someone from outside the family is observing them? That's a big deal. How does your partner show up behind closed doors versus in public? Do they chronically lay the blame for marriage problems on your shoulders? Are they actually emotionally invested in bed? Do they attempt to isolate you? Do they control other aspects of your lives together without regard to your input, needs, or desires? This is maybe even decorating the home or what food you eat, how many children you have, child rearing policies. Do they refuse to take responsibility for their actions and attitudes in your relationships by blame shifting, denying, justifying or minimizing their behaviors? Do they chronically sweep conflict under the rug, never to be resolved? Do they punish you later for something they agreed about or praised you about earlier? Do they frequently change their positive judgments of you into negative ones later? Y'all, each one of these are really, really helpful to consider. How do you feel from your partner? Like, do you feel like there's an instability and there's a walking on eggshells? You just never know who's going to be walking through the front door. That's really, really, really helpful to just know, like, is there emotional stability from that partner? Do you have a consistent interaction with them? And this is, I actually was continuing to read this later. Actually, I was reading this on the plane today, and it got to this one part that I thought was so important to emphasize. One of the key areas that really, and then they talk about indicators of covert abuse. So I'll talk about that another time. But for this one, I just thought it was so helpful. So I'm going to read from the book. I've given you a list of typical behaviors, many of which you've maybe experienced in your marriage, but there is one common denominator of all emotionally abusive relationships, and it's this. One person in the relationship does not take responsibility for their behaviors, ever. That's it. You have an infinite number of variants as far as specific behaviors and abuse tactics, but boil it all down and you get this at the very bottom of the pan every single time. So y'all, at the end of the day, are you in a relationship where the other person is willing to take responsibility? Did they look in the mirror? Are they willing to do the work? Are they willing to go into the arena with you and both of you take radical responsibility for your own self? Is there a victim mentality? Is there always this litany of things that you need to change, and somehow they always seem to get out clean every time? This is so important because, and the end goal, when we think about what's the end goal of relationship, why are we in this marriage to begin with? I think that is an incredibly important question that every single one of us needs to answer. Why am I here? Because our why is the powering force. It's the fuel in the engine that keeps us moving forward. So if we don't have a clear why, then we're actually not going to be able to have that target that we're shooting for. It's like the why drives us towards the end target. It serves as a fuel and it serves as the end destination in some ways, which is really, really, really beautiful. And so being clear of the why, knowing our ideal for the marriage. And this is what's so interesting. What's my ideal as a wife? What's my ideal actually for my husband in terms of how he treats me? What's my ideal for our marriage? What kind of a marriage do I want to have as it pertains to sex, as it pertains to faith, as it pertains to parenting, as it pertains to finances, as it pertains to business, as it pertains to each one of us individually? There are so many. When we talk about the ideal, it is so all-encompassing. And I'm really, there's a whole list of things that we could dive deep into. And I actually might get, I had on the Knowing podcast, Justin Donald, this episode came out this summer, I think. It was such a good conversation. We were talking about family life and how he and his wife do marriage to allow for him. He's a 9-figure investor. And he's got so much responsibility, so many business investors looking to him to inform how and where they spend their money. That's copious responsibility, right? And yet somehow he's able to maintain this strong, integrous relationship with his wife, that they get really clear on what's the target, what's our ideal, what's our target, what's our why, and then what are the areas, points of connection that allow for accountability to ensure that we actually check, are we heading in the right direction? That's where having the target is really, really helpful, because I love this analogy. It's effectively considering our target as bowling pins in an alley. Our bumpers and the guardrails, right, are our values. It's our mission statement. It's these things that kind of help us stay in the right direction, because otherwise, God forbid, my ball goes into someone else's lane. It's like the concept of the two rockets taking on off, and if one is ever so slightly heading, even just 1 or 2 degrees off, by the end, man, they're just going in massively different directions. So us being super clear on our target, where are we actually heading? What are we shooting for? What are we aiming for? Because there are so many unspoken differences. I was hosting a knowing retreat back in Vegas in April, and it was so helpful. I asked couples, there were 3 different couples there, and I asked, how do you define love? Every single one of the couples, and the men and the women in the marriages, defined love very differently from each other. So when wife A is telling husband A, I love you, she's meaning a very different thing than the way he interprets it. So then we wonder, how is it that what we say is just really passing each other? It's like, it's a completely different word. It's a completely different meaning. And my partner and I were chatting tonight, and he said the word sensitive. And I was like, wait, what do you mean by that? Let's define terms. Even the other day when I did the foundations of knowing, I was like, we need to define what is knowing, what does it mean to you, and why does it matter? What are the consequences of not knowing? The day before that, I was hosting a conversation between 2 brilliant minds from Harvard, and they both were like, we want to talk about identity. And I'm like, great, well, what does identity mean to you? And then we ended up, thank God we defined terms to begin with, y'all, because we could have had a conversation where the 2 of them, and then every single one of the attendees had a different definition of identity. And then we all walk away a million miles apart because we never defined terms. We never actually got to the starting point, back to Dr. Jeff Spencer, performance coach for Lance Armstrong. Where are we starting from? What are the definitions? Where are we aiming? Where are we starting from? And then what are the rails that are actually going to guide us through there? And so with defining the rails, it's okay, what are the boundaries? What are the unacceptable? I was talking to a girlfriend the other day. She and her husband both came from a past of addiction, and she has a boundary, whereas if her husband ever goes back and does a particular type of drug again, she's gone. She's done. She's not going to stay with him. That's a boundary. Every boundary has a consequence, and some boundaries are less, hey, if you do this, I'm going to need to step away and just kind of tend to me, a temporary moment of separation or disconnection, because I need to go take care of myself. That was really hurtful. Another boundary could be something as extreme as what she said. And so, y'all, it's just so important that we've got clarity. We know our why, we know our target, we know the boundaries and our values, because those are going to help guide us in the same direction, lest they're bowling in another alley and we don't even know it. So until we define what are our targets, it's going to be impossible for us to really identify, am I emotionally healthy? Am I actually leaning and living in and towards the direction that I actually want to? And what are my actual accountability markers that will allow for me to self-assess, am I actually living in accordance with that ideal? And it will also serve as a KPI and a boundary line for our partner to be able to self-assess. Am I being the kind of partner that they want, that they need, that they've told me that they'd like me to be? Because for so many of us, we've never spoken it, we've never said it, and thus we wonder why we're not getting what we need and what we want. So with that, I highly, highly encourage you and me to revisit what are our targets and do that exercise. Write your eulogy. If you were to write a eulogy for your marriage, for your family, what would it say at the end of your life? What would you all talk about at dinner? What would you watch it in the evenings? How would you spend your evenings? Is the TV in the bedroom? Is the TV in the living room? Is there no TV at all? How do you want to look back on the life that you've lived, and what would it feel like to look back with pride? To be able to feel that way, I have to live this way. So allow for everything to come up in terms of dreams, because until we get really, really, really intentional, we will never be able to live and act with intention. So with that, I will see you tomorrow.